All right.
Thank you.
Just next slide. Thank you. So today we're really going to understand the relevance of addressing those issues and how interlinked they are with our activities as an organization, especially on our humanitarian action. Trying to work on the cross-sectoral nature of this issue and really how we can integrate all those aspects of mitigating, reducing our footprint when we work. And once again, we're going to present and see a little bit the different approaches and tools that are out there to try to clarify some of the words that are used regularly in this sector. Thank you. So to do so, we're gonna have a little, so this is a little introduction, then we're gonna have a Mentimeter like yesterday and the first day to know a little bit who's here today and what are your expectations. We will have an overview of what we've been discussing earlier, which is going to set the big picture of the day. And after that, we're going to welcome our colleagues from the Swedish Red Cross, Rumi and Kanika, who are going to present us the experience they have in Cox's Bazar in addressing all those environmental issues in their work. And then we're gonna have our colleague, Richard Casagrande from Geneva joining us. I think he's already here very early, so thank you very much for joining. Catalina, can you change the slide? Thank you. So we're gonna have our colleague, Richard Casagrande, coming live from Geneva to present what is institutional or organizational greening, and what is the green response. And we're going to have a little discussion around this. And I think it's going to be supported by our colleague, Pascal Bourchet, who is recovery officer here in Kuala Lumpur office for Asia Pacific. After those presentations and already a little discussion, we're going to have more group discussion to reflect a little bit on our own personal work and what can we do personally to reduce negative impact of our work on nature. And we're going to have a closing, hopefully on time today. I don't know, we'll try. Thank you. And I think we're going to launch the Mentimeter now.
Can you see the Mentimeter now?
We see it, but yes, now we see it for, okay, but we don't have the number.
Okay, I am copying it to the chat box now. So you can go to menti.com and use the code 62685732. That is here in the screen and in the chat box as well. Oh, sorry, but I have made a mistake. And I started in the wrong slide. Yeah, this is our first question.
So you can go to menti.com 62685732.
Perfect. Yeah, so the first question, and some of you have already answered, is if you were here yesterday or the day before yesterday, we just want to know if you're completely new to the webinar, or if you have joined us in the previous days. We'll give you some time to join the session. The code is in the chat box for all of you to check. Yesterday, perfect. We have around 40 participants, so I'll give some more time. I know sometimes to get into Menti takes a few minutes, so we'll give you some time. Definitely most of you have joined us before. That's great. Okay, I think I'm gonna go to the next question, and you can still join and we will continue. So the next question is, where are you joining from? Thailand, Mongolia, Malaysia. Great. We want to know the countries you're joining from. Okay, we have Spain as well, Bangladesh, Philippines, Cambodia, Australia, Switzerland. Yeah, and our colleagues from Togo in the chat box. Great. Vanuatu, Myanmar. Great. We have lots of participants from Philippines, Lebanon, and Malaysia.
And a big stretch, huh? Between Vanuatu and Togo.
Yeah. And Morocco as well, here in the chat box. Great. Okay, I'll go for the next question. And we want to know, who do you work for? Asia Pacific National Society, IFRC, Partner National Society, Reference Center, National Society from other region, or other organization? Good, okay. We have a good number of national societies from other regions today. Great. A couple of more minutes for you to keep answering.
Morocco National Society. Okay.
That's great. Okay. Perfect. Okay, I will go for the last question, and is, what are your expectations for today? We want you to tell us what you expect after you saw the agenda and the objectives for today's session. What do you expect to learn, to get to know about? Practical operational insights. Great. Okay, hope we can meet that expectation. I think so. Anyone else? I'll give you some time for you to write. Let's talk practicality of application, less theory. Good. Yeah, good balance between both is important. Green response, reducing carbon emissions, long-term program plan for green response. Would like to know more on how green response could be integrated in our operations. Case study story of green response in emergency long-term operations. Environmental perspective in my work. Fantastic. Good. Tools and approaches. Action for long-term approaches and localization, nature-based humanitarian action. Perfect. Okay. I don't know if there are more answers coming through. Yeah, green response integrated in response operations. Okay, I think we're good. I will leave it there and give you the floor now for starting this session.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope we're gonna have. It's not. I hope. I know we're gonna have some practical example today. So it's very, very interesting to see that that's what people are eager to hear about. but I will share with you a little bit of theory before. Sorry for that. Hopefully it is the last one. But just to introduce a little bit, just to set the big picture, to set the scene again, and to see where we are in this webinar. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes? Okay,
yes,
okay. So let me just put that here. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. So you remember these ecosystem service disruptions due to the three crises we're facing: climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation, as well as pollutions. Those three crises are fueled by human activities, but they're also impacting human societies, and they're also impacting and fueling each other. So we're in that big negative spirals that is creating stressors on us: more extreme events, more intensity, lower agricultural productivity, etc. As an impact, we see loss of livelihoods, loss of lives, unfortunately, migrations, damage to infrastructure, etc., etc., and the most vulnerable being affected the most. We've seen that we can act on this as the movement. We have two entry points. The first one is to work in the midst of the crisis, to work towards resilience with the community and also within our organization to strengthen our resilience. And this second entry point, the one we're going to see today, is environmental sustainability. We're going to address the causes of the crisis. We're going to try to reduce what is fueling those crises. I'll start very briefly with the terminology of environmental sustainability, which is basically implementing things without compromising the ability of the future generation or of the people in other places than where we are implementing things to meet their needs, meaning we are not going to jeopardize the needs of the future generation of other communities when we are implementing an activity. And this is a broad general terminology. It's not only for humanitarian, it's for any kind of organization or even any kind of activity. It's the idea of reducing the environmental impact. When it comes to us as the movement, this terminology of environmental sustainability underpins green response and institutional greening, two aspects we're going to discuss a little bit more with our facilitators later on. Like yesterday with the adaptation, we said, or strengthening resilience, the message we want to have is that we want to be part, we can be part of the solutions. We have our role to play in those crises. So we can address the drivers of the crisis, either way externally by supporting the communities we are working with, or internally as an organization, IFRC, national societies, we can also reduce the negative impact we have on the environment. We can mainstream integrate these aspects of environmental sustainability in our strategic planning, in our operation, and in our programs. Some activities we are already doing, and we can, like yesterday, see that we just need to tweak them a little bit to have maybe a little bit of a different angle on the way we are working. And others, we might need to bring more of a new angle to integrate all those aspects. But once again, we can be part of the solutions, and we even have a very, very good position to be to make a difference as the Red Cross Red Crescent movement. So the first thing I wanted to talk about in keeping doing what we already do is raising awareness. We are good. We are very good at that. We are very close to the communities, and we are good on raising awareness and discussing with the communities. Yesterday, we introduced Why Adapt on discussing with communities what is climate change, or what are the negative impact of pollution and of environmental degradation and biodiversity loss. And here we can do that also to introduce to the communities how their actions sometimes can have a negative impact on their own environment, and how they can reduce this negative impact. And we really have a role to play in organizing trainings on pollution, environment degradation, We work with community education, awareness raising activities, school-based activities, etc., etc. All the things that we are already doing, we can do that with the angle of reducing our negative impact or their negative impact on their close environment. Something else we are doing, and we are doing very, very often, and even now, because these pictures that you can see are examples of cleaning environment campaigns, and they come from the Twitter account from the IFRC Asia Pacific Regional Office, and they were taken yesterday, I think. I downloaded that yesterday in Fiji and in Maldives. Our volunteers are really involved into cleaning the environment, and here they're cleaning the beach to ensure a clean environment for the communities. And I think this is okay. We're talking about reducing our negative impact. It's important. First thing maybe is also to clean where the environment is already degraded. Okay, so this is really keeping doing what we already do. Then we have this thing which is climate change mitigation. Climate change mitigation is also a broad terminology which is widely used among different organizations. It is the other side of the coin of climate change adaptation that we've been discussing yesterday, adapting to the new condition. Now it's mitigation, it's reducing our greenhouse gas emission in order to reduce the way we fuel the climate change crisis. And we can do that also as an organization by reducing our emitting activity. Once again, I use this Hummer with a Red Cross logo. I'm not sure it's true or not, but a Hummer is known as being a very polluting vehicle. We don't want to see that in our fleet, hopefully, or at least the minimum possible. And then also using clean energy, working on energy efficiency to avoid losses of energy, and using as much as possible sustainable transportation. And then we have, okay, adapting, climate change mitigation, and last thing is really integrating this change. Integrating that as an organization, we have to reduce our footprint. There are two aspects of it that are very, very interlinked. The first one is the interinstitutional or organizational greening, which is really for all organizations, not only ours, but any type of sector of work, trying as much as possible to promote eco-friendly practices, trying as much as possible to reduce waste, to reduce carbon emission, to reduce greenhouse gases. So it can go from waste management to reducing the AC, etc., etc. This is what we call institutional or organizational greening. And Richard and Pascal are going to talk about it a bit later today. And last thing we can do, which is very interlinked once again, and it can be probably under the same umbrella, is the green response and recovery. It's also reducing our footprint, also reducing the negative impact we can have on the ground, this time more specifically oriented towards our response, our humanitarian operations on the field. Okay, this is all I wanted to have as an introduction, the broad picture, the big theoretical picture for today. If you have any question, we can go for it, but I think having example would be probably a lot more interesting than this theory. But if you have any question, do not hesitate. Okay, so let's dive in examples, and I welcome Kanika and Rumi from the Swedish Red Cross. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. Kanika, you are our Green Response Advisor for the Swedish Red Cross. Yes, and Rumi is Program Manager in Cox's Bazar, and they're going to share with us their experience from the field. Please.
Thank you very much, Ramon. I'm just going to, I hope you can see my screen, and now it should be in presentation. Fantastic. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining from. It's very much morning here in Sweden. My name is Kanika Takar. I'm a Green Response and Environmental Advisor for the Swedish Red Cross. And Rumi, I don't know if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you, Kanika. Yeah, myself, Mohammad Iftekhar Alam Rumi. I am working as a program manager in Population Movement Operation of Cox's Bazar for Swedish Red Cross. Thank you.
So Rumi and I have been invited today to tell you a little bit about some of the green response work that we have been doing on the ground in Cox's Bazar. And before I jump right into the practical examples, I'd just like to follow up on Noel's presentation a little bit with kind of how the Swedish Red Cross approaches green response. So you see here a little bit about how we as a national society are approaching green response, but also how that factors into our operations. So what is green response? Arno has just given a really great overview. The concept was actually first introduced by the Swedish Red Cross back in 2012, and now it's been more broadly adopted by the movement, which is really fantastic. What I'd like to say is for the Swedish Red Cross is that green response is not just about response. We also, under the umbrella of green response, choose to include recovery and preparedness as well. And for us, green response is really, it's an approach. It's a way in which we consider the environmental impacts of our activities, and we take active steps to avoid, reduce, manage damaging impacts to the environment while enhancing positive ones. And for us, what that really means is that, you know, it's not just about stopping the impact, the negative impacts that we have on the environment, but to also recognize that the environment gives a lot of positive benefit as well, and that we have a responsibility to think about those positive benefits and try to amplify them, try to strengthen them within our work. For the Swedish Red Cross, we work with 4 major components of green response, and my colleague Richard Casagrande from IFRC is going to go more into these in his presentation, but very lightly for the Swedish Red Cross, we do work with greening our institution. So that includes having our sustainability policy, which we report on every year, as well as measuring environmental footprint of our offices in Sweden. We also look at our logistics and supply chain. And so this means that we try to strengthen sustainability considerations in our procurement, our secondhand shops, and in travel. We look at awareness raising. Arno really stressed that, you know, this is a real strength for the Red Cross, and we also try to draw on this as well as a national society where we have sustainability ambassadors who work through our branches in our communities to try to find opportunities to strengthen sustainability in our work and how we can better inform the community on how they can strengthen their own sustainability. And we also work very much with international and national level policy engagement. So we work very much with different governments or different international organizations to ensure that they are, when they're thinking about environment, they're also thinking about humanitarian aid, or when they're thinking about humanitarian aid, that they're also thinking about climate and environment. And finally, in the part that I'm going to really be speaking about today is the greening of our projects and programs and how we are really trying to integrate thinking about the environment primarily in our international operations. So for Swedish Red Cross, green response in projects and programs is really, we view it as being part of a solution. It's not a solution by itself. And what I mean by that is that we don't go and do environmental activities for the sake of doing environmental activities. We are not an environmental organization. What we are is a humanitarian organization that always focuses or primarily focuses on WASH, health, and DRR. So disaster risk reduction. And it's through these areas of WASH, health, and disaster risk reduction, as well as PGI and CEA, that we really try to strengthen or consider the environment in those activities. And so we call this mainstreaming, or Arno used a really nice word before in terms of integrating. So we try to think about how can we look at a health activity, look at a disaster risk response activity, look at a WASH activity, and how can we consider not only what might be our negative impacts to the environment, but also how can we strengthen the environment in those activities. And we really take this as we take small steps to make an impact approach. We don't necessarily look for the biggest fanciest solutions, but we can think about small things, even like in WASH examples or public health examples, just thinking about the types of soap that we're using, how are they packaged, where are they coming from? Those little things, making sure that we keep pieces of plastic out of the environment, those are small things that are easier for our program managers and our different operations around the world to do, but can actually have a significant impact. There we go. So why should we care? As the Swedish Red Cross, we've really decided that, you know, there's a reason that we want to care about the humanitarian aid and environment together. And that's because we really see as those goals going hand in hand. Our communities, we can see, particularly the ones that we support through our international development and aid work, as those communities really depend on natural services such as water supply and storm protection. Actually, all communities everywhere rely heavily on the environment for things like this. A healthy environment really strengthens the ability to adapt and to recover from future shocks. So when we go into a respond to a disaster, we want to make sure that that community is better suited to be able to resist and be resilient to the next set of shocks that they might face. And so a healthy environment can really help to do that. The solutions that we support in the environment often have multiple co-benefits. And this is something I'm really going to try to stress in the rest of my presentation, is that it's often that these co-benefits or even add even more value to the work that we're doing. And what I mean by co-benefits is that when we do things like plant a tree, it might be, you know, for a specific aim, like I'm going to talk about soil erosion later on, but it can also add other benefits to communities, such as natural cooling, can help reduce noise, help reduce death, and also offer some mental health and psychosocial support. And this is a question I get asked a lot. This is really something I try to push a lot through our green response work, that actually having things like you know, plants and green in our environment really help to support mental health. I myself come from Canada. Canada this year has actually introduced that doctors can now prescribe individuals to go to national parks for reducing their mental stress and improving their mental health. And that's because people really you know, benefit from being in natural environments, from being in you know, in close proximity to nature. So we also see this quite a bit in the communities that we work in. If you often go to places like a refugee camp or a settlement after a disaster, you can see that often these are not the most conducive areas for recovery, for people to recover from their different mental stresses. But if we can do a little bit more to add a little bit of green, to add a little bit of comfort, we can really do a lot to help communities recover. And finally, green solutions are often cost-effective and resilient to price shocks. And this is something that we've also really found, particularly now as the world is facing all sorts of different crises and oil shortages and different price shocks. This is a really good time to be looking at how green response activities are actually helping to make those stressors a little bit more stable. So now I'm going to come to more actually of specific work in Cox's Bazar. So the Swedish Red Cross has been engaged in Cox's Bazar since the beginning of the population movement emergency in 2017. So as we know, in 2017, more than 1 million people crossed the border into Bangladesh and have been settled into the Cox's Bazar area. And this has been a real, you know, stress to the environment, of course, as there was a huge amount of deforestation that happened, but also it's a very tight, closed, enclosed area where you have a number of people living under very you know, stressful and very dire situations. In Camp 18 itself, the Bangladeshi Red Crescent Society, with support from the Swedish Red Cross, is responsible for the drinking water supply, sanitation, and hygiene promotion, and as well as fecal sludge management within the Camp 18. The greening activities begin with solarization of water treatment and supply systems, as well as the aerobic fecal sludge digesters. This is actually, we've taken responsibility for the fecal sludge that's created within the toilets that we support, within the sanitation. within the sanitation facilities that we provide, and we ensure that the fecal sludge that's collected is appropriately treated, and that we're not discharging harmful components or harmful materials back to the environment. The hygiene promotion activities have also been a huge part of mobilizing the communities and are central components for WASH and our greening activities. And this also comes back to some of that awareness raising that Arnaud raised, that talked about before. In 2021, Swedish Red Cross also undertook an environmental screening. So what this means is that we did kind of a survey of what are the different environmental risks that are taking place within our operation area in Cox's Bazar. And we use this to identify different areas of risk and possible improvement within the work. And this is a tool called the NEAT Plus. And I think perhaps Richard might talk about this later on, but essentially it's a tool that's available for any organization to use to be able to use a Kobo or Excel-based survey to better understand what might be their environmental risks. So as I mentioned, we started off with solarization, so the introduction of solar panels for our water supply activities. So these are our boreholes that we operate within camps 18 and 12 within Cox's Bazar. And I would say this is probably more of a, these are more of a environmentally focused solution, whereas really what we were after here was to reduce the overall carbon footprint through using solar panels instead of generators. But what I really like to stress here, and I think, we talk a lot about solar panels. These are a very clear green response solution. You'll hear about these as probably the most popular example I've seen already 3 or 4 times now, that the picture that's also on my background, which is, discussing solar panels also in Cox's Bazar with the IFRC. I mean, these are things that we see a lot of, but what we don't necessarily think about is, well, what else, or what are the other benefits that solar panels offer us? And for us, what we've seen is that having solar panels in place really helps us to build resilience to fuel shortages and fuel price shocks. And particularly, I think right now is a really good moment in the world where we can see the price of oil and fuel, the diesel, it's really gone up. I mean, a lot of the work I've done has also been in Sudan, and we can also see a lot of shortages happening there. What this allows us to do with doing things like using solar panels is that we can remove ourselves from those very volatile markets, and that the sun is almost always shining. I mean, we do have, of course, days where our monsoon seasons where it might be a little bit more difficult to be able to get the full value of the sun's benefits to us in terms of an energy source. But this really overall gives us a much more stable picture in terms of what are the costs of our operations and what can we expect to be looking at in terms of how much fuel and how much resources that we'll need. Some of those other co-benefits I talked about are also that we have a reduced noise and fumes, which means better living conditions. As you can see here, these solar panels, these can be really close to where people are living. And so if these solar panels were not here, these might actually be generators. And so imagine having a generator running 24 hours a day right next to your home. That's not really a good place to recover. It's not a great place for your children either. So making sure that we can kind of provide better living conditions is a real positive as well. Also reduced heat generation. These are oftentimes very, very warm, hot. Solar panels in place, they're going to reflect back up some of that heat, but they're not going to increase the overall amount of heat that might be within an area. This is also our fecal sludge treatment plant. Sorry, and I should say almost entirely eliminated the need for generators. We've significantly reduced the overall fuel that we use here. So this is a real carbon savings for us. For our fecal sludge treatment plant, so as I mentioned, we have been working within fecal sludge, or essentially black water management since almost the beginning of the operation in 2017. We have just this year opened a new fecal sludge treatment plant in Camp 18. The real need for doing that was that we needed to have a plant that allowed us to expand the overall amount of fecal sludge that could be treated. So we've gone up, I think, 3 times in terms of the amount of fecal sludge that can be treated to allow to expand to now be able to accommodate treatment for up to 15,000 households daily. But in this new plant, we've also opted for a chemical-free and fossil fuel-free treatment plant. And this, again, it helps us to reduce costs or reduce variable costs, because we don't have to purchase so many chemicals or worry about the cost of fuel. We've also been able to reduce noise and excess heat quite a bit, as well as the outputs from the fecal sludge treatment plant, as well as the previous fecal sludge treatment operation, are actually helping to improve the overall environment around the plant by providing environmentally safe water. So actually the quality of the water that's coming out of the treatment plant is better than the quality of the water that's in the stream that runs by the camp. So we're actually helping to improve the quality of that stream water. And also we have found that the actual outputs from this plant are really high quality fertilizer that we're using within the fecal sludge treatment facility to grow some vegetables, bananas, turmeric, and things like this. Now we do have a problem in that the acceptance of this fertilizer use is not necessarily there yet, so we need to still find more solutions for it, but it's something we're definitely looking at. And in the longer run, as I mentioned, it's more cost effective, it's more resilient to outside shocks. So despite what happens in the rest of the world, we'll still be able to keep providing this very important solution. So now I want to talk about, addressing WASH challenges through a greener response. I think the last 2 examples I gave with the solarization and the fecal sludge treatment, these are really kind of more environmentally focused activities. While they are, of course, WASH activities, the end game has a very strong environmental focus. Whereas now I'd like to talk a little bit more about, what are WASH challenges that we're addressing and how we've done that with a greener response. And the first is landslide protection of WASH facilities. Within the Cox's Bazar camp setting itself, the soils, because of the amount of deforestation that has happened, the soils themselves have are quite, they don't have a lot of strength to stay together. And so that they degrade quite quickly. And in heavy rain events, those soils can wash away quite quickly. Not only is that a threat to human life, it's also a significant threat to our WASH operations. And so everything that we do within Camp 18 needs to have a WASH focus. We cannot just go and do different kinds of humanitarian aid activities because we want to. So we always have to make sure that we focus back on WASH. And so within this case of landslide protection, that's exactly what we've done. So the heavy rains result in landslides due to those loose soils. Our overall objective is to protect the WASH infrastructure from landslides and soil erosion. So not only do we want to protect the WASH infrastructure from the land coming downhill and inundating them, but also from losing land around the different kinds of facilities that we have, because those can also present a real safety risk. What we've done is that we've been planting deep-rooting buffalo grasses to help stabilize those soils. So you can see that here in this photo, that these are the buffalo grasses that we've started to install. And also using more durable materials such as geotextile sandbags as opposed to regular thin plastic sandbags. So these geotextile sandbags, not only are they a little bit thicker and they don't degrade nearly as quickly, but they also help to add some friction with the soil so that the land does not slip away as easily. And also using more precast poles or bamboo poles to further stabilize the slopes. And some of these environmental benefits are that the buffalo grass is what we would consider a nature-based solution. So it's using a natural a natural aid, which is these grasses, to strengthen the soils while also promoting groundwater infiltration. All of our water activities or water supply activities depend heavily on groundwater and aquifers. And so we need to make sure that we're also doing what we can to promote better infiltration back to those aquifers, making sure that they recharge. So these also provide that infiltration activity, as well as slowing the water flow. So they're going to strengthen the soils to make sure that the soils don't wash away. They're going to add some infiltration, so making sure that that water has somewhere else to go that's going to go into the soil, as well as slowing down the overall speed at which that water runs off. And the use of the more durable materials can also help reduce the risk of deforestation within the area, which has also been a significant environmental concern within the Cox's Bazar area. Other benefits are also that more plants and grasses offer natural cooling and reduce dust. As you can see here in the photo, this soil, it can be really dusty. It's very fine grained. It's dry for most of the year here. So this can offer a little bit of reduced dust, better respiratory environment, of course, for our population, our affected population. And as I mentioned before, more natural cooling, as well as reduced noise and sound, so that these soft surfaces such as grass, they can help reduce the amount of noise that's bouncing around, create a more comfortable environment. And as I mentioned before, improved mental health and psychosocial support. Drainage cleaning and maintenance has been a really big issue as well within the camp. During the heavy rain season, oftentimes the homes get flooded because the water is not channeling away as it should. And so what we really wanted to look at here was to look for proper channels for stormwater to drain away from the homes. Now, the channels already exist, as you can see here, but they have really not been maintained very well. So our activity has really focused on, of course, doing the actual cleaning and clearing of those drainage canals, committing to ongoing maintenance, but also really working with the community to better sensitize on the importance of the drainage canals, and doing things like distribution of potties for children. What we found is that oftentimes within the drainage canals, we're finding a lot of fecal matter, so poo, and what we found is that even though the sanitation facilities are working really well, they're not always maybe the most child friendly, or it's not always so easy to bring your child to them. So what we've done instead is make sure that these homes have potties available for children to use, and that that waste gets drainage canals. We also found a lot of waste, plastic waste in particular within these drainage, through our hygiene promotion activities, to make sure that the community understands the importance of how it benefits them, how it benefits their home, to make sure that these drainage canals are well maintained and that they remain clear. So the environmental benefits of doing the drainage cleaning, maintenance, and of course the awareness raising, is it helps promote natural drainage back to existing creeks and streams. We have reduced flushing of solid and humid waste to the natural environment as well. This is also, this is a low-tech, low-cost solution. It just requires maintenance. It requires community engagement, and we see that as a real benefit as well. The other benefits are also, of course, natural vector control by eliminating sources of stagnant water, reduced odors, and of course, a more pleasant environment to live. And of course, the overall objective is achieved in that the water actually drains away from the homes and doesn't get backed up. And my last example that I'd like to share is about urinals with filtering soak pits. So what we found in the camp is that there are a number of unhygienic urinals being situated close to mosques or to other facilities that are producing odors and actually end up contaminating surface waters because essentially they were just pipes leaching to the open environment without any treatment whatsoever. And so the activity that was proposed was the installation of urinals with improved design to make sure that the odors are reduced, but also that are fitted with a filtering soak pit. And why this is an environmental solution is that it reduces the risk of pollution to the surface water. So now instead of being channeled directly to surface waters, the urine is going through a slow sand filtration. This allows for a slow discharge to the soil. This also helps to recharge the aquifers that we talked about before, and also, sorry, I should take a step back there, helps to recharge those aquifers that we talked about before that we're really heavily reliant on. I mean, urine is mostly water. So if we can make sure that it's treated properly, it's soaked through, that water is really going to be benefiting the aquifers that we work with as well. And through doing it in a slow, dissipated way, we're reducing that risk of a point source solution or something that's overwhelming for the environment to handle. It also reduces the overall amount of urine that needs to be treated at the treatment plant. So again, this is a little less resource intensive if we can do something on site rather than it needing to be collected, to be transported, to be processed. This is also much better for the environment. The other benefits is that, of course, there are reduced odors because the urine is immediately channeled to a closed soak pit. The soak pits have been installed also near tap stands to promote increased groundwater infiltration, so extra spilt water. We're also looking at how can we channel that back into the ground rather than it running to surface channels and being lost from the immediate environment. And we're also reducing the pressure on the drainage canals. The urinals are also nicer to use and have reduced the overall incidence of public urination as well. But it's not all rosy news, right? Sometimes we encounter some challenges, and I really want to stress, these have not always been the easiest things to come about. Some of the big challenges that we've encountered is that behavior change is often the most important part of any greening activity, because we need to see people adapting to new ideas or new ways of doing things. But this is also the most challenging and time-consuming activity. And I think we often forget how difficult it is to do that work. So it's really, really important that we have to think about that behavior change. And this is something that the Swedish Red Cross was really trying to do in terms of thinking about, why would we change to a greener way of doing things? How does this affect communities at their core? And how can we use those motivations to change the way we do things and change behavior? We want to see that change coming from communities. It should always be a bottom-up approach as much as possible rather than a top-down one. With planting activities, timing is very, very important. And this is unfortunately a lesson that we've encountered in many different places in our work, that we assume that we will be able to get planting permissions and materials before the monsoon comes. It often doesn't happen that way. We get our materials in the middle or after the monsoon season, and then they're almost useless to us. And those planting materials in terms of plants themselves or trees will end up perishing and dying. So timing is very important. We have to find ways to, mitigate those risks, but also have backup plans in case things don't work out. Explaining the concept of green response has been a real challenge, and we need to be better at communicating. This is something that even happens, within our own organization, not just with the community, but just internally. We have a real struggle with the term, green response, and what does it mean, what it doesn't mean. So I think that this is something that we as a movement need to be a little bit better at in terms of how can we be better at communicating it, and how can we make maybe move away from the term when we're talking to communities and make it something that's more tangible for them to understand. We at the Swedish Red Cross have been really lucky to have green response specific funding. And so some of these activities that I've talked about today would not have been possible without that specific funding. And so this is something that we're really aware of, that just because you want to do something environmentally more friendly, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will have the resources, the time, or the donor support to do that. So it's really important that where you can, that you find donors who are in line with those views and who are willing to support you down that journey. And that we've also found that a lot of the tools, such as the NEAT Plus, which is that assessment tool I mentioned earlier, some of these tools are still really difficult to use and to understand and to know how and when to use. Kind of support. So we're really lucky to have that. But we definitely recognize. Yes?
We lost you during maybe 20 seconds. So
okay.
NEAT Plus.
Okay,
we didn't
super.
get your last sentence only.
Great. And can you hear me again now, Arno?
All good, yes.
Okay, great. So I was just saying very quickly that the NEAT Plus, you know, what we've realized is that this tool, while it's really helpful, it still is very difficult to use for people who are new to the area. And at the Swedish Red Cross, we're really lucky that we have myself and another environmental focused colleague who can offer that technical guidance, but not all national societies have that. So it's also something that we need to help build better guidance around for more national societies to access. And finally, just looking ahead for some of our next steps. So the first thing that we're looking at hopefully this year is to be looking at doing some rainwater harvesting within our hygiene promotion site. We also want to continue to strengthen community awareness for environmental sustainability. We want to, I mentioned earlier about the fecal sludge treatment plant, about how there's a high quality fertilizer that can come from there. It is made with human waste. And so we need to think about you know, building acceptance for that and hopefully being able to donate this to the community or somehow use it so that we're not, you know, creating another invaluable waste product. It's a really high valued waste product that actually in Europe and in North America, we use this kind of waste quite a bit as fertilizer. So it's about changing the mindset. Solarization of all of our wash activities is definitely on the agenda. I think we're almost there. Strengthening our procurement practices is something we've been really talking about. And of course, the need to better document what we've done and building some case studies. And I know this is something Rumi is really working on. So we're curious, what are your thoughts and your questions? And we're just here to answer some and have a little discussion with you. But thank you so much from myself and from Rumi. And we're here for your time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kanika, for this presentation. Excellent. Thank you, Rumi. Do we have any question? Please feel free to raise hand, type in the chat. We need to have questions. I see one hand raised. Mukesh, please.
Thank you, Arnold. Thank you very much, Kanika. It was excellent presentation. I love this. Actually, lots of great effort in Cox's Bazar. And thank you to Rumi as well. I was looking at actually, probably you might have, I'm more looking at the practical stuff, like how it works in the community context. And you have given a great examples of what you are exactly doing in terms of greening of your projects and programming, Cox's Bazar, lots of things. Some of the concerns there is, of course, it may not be like a perfect, but there are lots of good things. Like, for example, when you say you have replaced the different fuels consumptions and replaced by the solar, but still I feel like this is much better. Of course, you are using the renewable energy options and so on, but then at the same time, still you need some pumps, motorized pumps that need to connect. So I don't know, is there any special kind of pump that do not produce any noise or sound? Maybe very less, but still, if I recall with my experience, normally the fuel pumps are more noisy, definitely. Maybe this might be less. So but again, it is better options. Maybe you have more response on that. But my question is not around that. I was thinking also, like in practical terms, you have mentioned something. I took the photo of one screen on my mobile, so I'm just looking at the first slide. It was about greening your institution, logistics and change supply, awareness raising, environment and climate, so on. You have mentioned, for example, greening our institution. This is something, just one example. I wanted a little more on others as well, but then your details was on the projects and program. So when you say sustainability policy, what is the key aspects that you pay attention on the such type of policy, on the sustainable policy? And also, like, what are the practical example, like measuring the footprints in your office or our office, whatever you say, what we can do? Just simple example, maybe you can say, like, you put several flower pots in your office. Is this something going to help? So I want those kind of practical examples in the easier terms that people focus on that actions. Of course, at the outcome level, this really sounds good. So some examples on that. For example, if you are talking about supply chain or logistic, maybe you might be saying that, okay, we are no more using plastic, we are using degradable materials, cartoons, and so on. So is that something? I just wanted to clarify myself. This is very interesting things coming up nowadays. And this is something I must say that these are not new actually. We have been doing a lot from the decades, but we have not paying as an attention that this is our green response. We should pay more attention on this. We have been doing like knowingly, unknowingly, everybody, even in the community, many people does, but not as a focus or kind of with the thoughts of green environment. So that's just little comment with appreciations, great work, and some clarification. Thank you, Kanika.
Great, thanks. Maybe I'll hand over to Ruby by first quickly about the pumps.
Okay, yeah, at this moment, we have our backup pumps, but we can explore the opportunity that if there is any pumps that we found that with less noise, then we will definitely explore the options. But at this moment, the pump we are using, yeah, it's quite noisy. We'll look at that option. So we have yet not actually able to use some pumps which is less noisy or reduce the sound actually. So but we can explore that options. About sustainability, yeah, sustainability policy, Kanika can discuss on that. But at the institutional level, actually we are not making something big difference. What we are thinking, like, we now try to use both page printing. So this is we ethically agree that we don't waste papers rather than using it properly. When previously we go out of the room, we don't turn off our lights or fans. Now the thing is that we try to do that. And like for in our premises where there are now dustbins in proper places, now we're trying to put or already put in some dustbins in proper place so that we have the dust in right place. So these are the small things we are thinking. One thing also, we are not deleting the messages in our outbox or somewhere. Now we try to delete. Actually, this will reduce the impact on the environment, on the load on this environment level. So these are the small things we are thinking. In our distribution, we totally now omitted using plastic bags. Now we are using environmental friendly bags in any of our distributions. So this is not only as Swedish Red Cross, but also IFRC in PMO are practicing these. So we are using jute bag instead of plastic bags to stabilize the lands. So we are not making some big things, but small things. We believe that this will impact the environment. Thank you, Dada.
Thank you so much, Rumi. The small things made lots of sense actually. So
yeah,
good work. Yeah. I can just really come in really quickly about kind of the sustainability policy of the Swedish Red Cross, where we have looked at, we make commitments such as we will measure our carbon footprint and strive to reduce every year on year. So a lot of for our international work, a lot of that carbon emission comes from travel. So we definitely reduce our travels. We have to be really mindful about that. As Rumi was saying, You know, we do actually count the amount of paper that we use as a national society and try to reduce overall. It's also smaller things like, you know, I host every few months, I host an online coffee break, an environmental coffee break, where we just talk about different environmental issues within the organization. And just doing that, getting people more aware of what they can do, it also helps to keep each other accountable. So you, like Rumi was saying, if somebody is going to notice that you turn off the lights or not, you're more likely to do it. And so just doing these small things can help us have some actual impact. I won't go into too much detail, but because actually Richard is going to talk a lot about the institutional greening, and I think we'll have some really good examples for you.
Thank you so much, Kanika. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mukesh, for your question. Thank you, Kanika. Thank you, Rumi, for this presentation and the work. Very interesting work. There are two questions in the chat, but as Kanika just said, Richard is going to address also other aspects. So we might keep those questions and discuss them after. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's also very interesting to see that during this webinar, we had a storytelling, which was a bit dividing what the green side, resilience strengthening, and the blue side, reducing our negative impact. But we can see that the lines are blurred, as we were saying. We had to unpack to facilitate the storytelling, but in reality, you mix the approaches on the ground and you do what you need to do to be more efficient. Let's have a 2-minute break, maybe, and then we will come back with Richard and possibly Pascal on greening institutionalization and green response. Thank you again, Kanika and Rumi. Thank you.
Thanks.
Katarina, are you here for the 2-minute break? Yes, 2 minutes, very short.
Yeah. Short break, but necessary. We're back. Arnaud, are you there?
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I've been caught a little bit also by this very short break. Sorry. Richard, thank you very much for joining us. So please welcome Richard Casagrande. He's working at IFRC Geneva as a senior officer, recovery and green response. And he's going to present us today all those aspects of organizational institutional greening and more specifically green response. Thank you very much, Richard, for joining us very early in Europe. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Arno and Catalina, and thank you, colleagues. I'm very happy to be here and to have an audience that's excited and motivated to talk about this topic. I'm responsible now in IFRC Secretariat from the Geneva level for this theme of green response, which you've already been hearing about. We have to give a lot of credit to Swedish Red Cross, who really kickstarted this work going back around 10 years ago. And we are now doing our best as IFRC Secretariat to shape this and take it forward for the whole membership, and also working closely with ICRC, who's also quite advanced in this area. So I will try not to repeat things that have been said already today and in the last couple of days, but I'll try and give you the big picture perspective of what we think is involved in green response, including this element of institutional greening, as we can call it, or reducing our environmental footprint as organizations, as well as the greening work on the ground, so programs and operations. And I will give some practical examples from national societies from around the world, as well as some balance to the theory. I hope that my colleague Pascal Boucher from Asia Pacific is joining, because he will help to facilitate a discussion at the end of this. So let me share my screen. Now I'm on Zoom, not Teams here, so let me get this right. Hopefully you can see the presentation.
Yes, not yet in presentation mode, but we can see the PowerPoint, yes.
Now it's
Excellent
presentation
work.
mode. Okay.
All good.
So I won't repeat this, it's been said already many times, the triple planetary crisis. The UN likes to use this term. It's not only about climate change, very important, hot topic, but let's not forget about the rest of the environmental issues, the environmental degradation and pollution, plastic waste, a massive problem we all face, particularly Asia Pacific. I think there's a bit of repetition here as well, so I won't even go through the slide, but from my perspective, the reminder here, we know now the humanitarian sector and the environment are closely linked. So environmental degradation and climate change, it impacts and drives humanitarian crises. It's also much more difficult to respond to humanitarian needs if the environment is degraded. And the third point is that our humanitarian response can also negatively affect the environment. And that's really what we're talking about today. So allow me to skip over those points to save some time. Here's just a few examples from past years, not necessarily the Red Cross, but the humanitarian sector. And if we leave aside carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and contribution to climate change, here's some examples of local environmental harm that's been caused. So deforestation around refugee camps, very well known problem, particularly, but not only in Africa. Unfortunately, refugees cutting down trees in order to source cooking fuel, wood to cook with, or wood for shelters. We've seen groundwater depletion by over-drilling of wells, and this was a problem in Afghanistan, has been a problem in Afghanistan over the decades. We've seen well-intentioned livelihoods projects go wrong. The photo there is from Sri Lanka after the tsunami, the Indian Ocean tsunami, where humanitarian organizations over-supported the fishing sector. We actually created new fishermen by oversupplying boats and nets and things, and what that actually led to was a collapse in fishing stocks. And the bottom right corner is the infamous example of the cholera being reintroduced to Haiti by the United Nations mission by poor management of their fecal sludge. So just a few examples of how the humanitarian sector can have, and humanitarian response can negatively affect the environment. This is probably a bit of repetition as well from previous days, but just a reminder from my perspective, we have this cycle of disasters and crises. And if we respond to a disaster or crisis in an environmentally damaging way, we're just contributing to increased disaster risks and higher vulnerabilities. We're not really contributing to break the cycle of vulnerability. But if we can have a greener response, which actually contributes to a healthier environment, then we can be reducing disaster risks and improving community resilience. So I think this idea of green response and improving the way that we work, it really does feed through into addressing this cycle of disasters. Now, what is green response? I think you saw the definition put up by Arno at the beginning, so that's good. This comes from our IFRC Secretariat Environmental Policy, but in brief, save lives and reduce suffering without risking damage to the environment. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Do our work as humanitarians without harming the environment. Okay, you'll note that we're not trying to become an environmental organization. We're not trying to become WWF or Greenpeace or something like that. We're still a humanitarian organization. We could simply call this environmentally sustainable humanitarian response. So green response is just the name that has developed in the Red Cross movement to refer to doing our work in a more environmentally sustainable way. I mean, the UN calls this environment and humanitarian action, EHA, E-H-A. ECHO, currently our major donor, calls it minimizing the environmental footprint of humanitarian assistance. It all means the same thing, whether you want to call it green response, environmental sustainability, reducing our footprint, that's what we're talking about. Some other reasons why is it a priority? I think you probably saw some of this in the first days of the webinars. Well, we've been making promises and commitments for decades as the Red Cross and as the humanitarian sector of why the environment should be a priority. Now, I won't go into details here, whether it's sphere standards or the Sendai framework or our own Red Cross policies, code of conduct, DRM policy. But in more recent years, we have 4 very clear commitments. One is IFRC Secretariat. We have an environmental policy that says we need to be doing all of the things that I'm going to be talking about. We have now Strategy 2030, and as many of you are aware, for the first time, that put addressing the climate and environment crises as one of the major priorities. We have the movement ambitions to address the climate crisis. It talks mostly about climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, but it does talk about the reduction of our environmental footprint as well. And we now have the new charter, the Climate and Environment Charter, which I'm sure you talked about. But what I would want to remind you about here with the charter is that there are 7 main commitments in the Climate and Environment Charter. And this has now been signed by 120-something national societies and 250 plus humanitarian organizations. Okay, so it has widespread support. Commitment 1 is really the one around climate change adaptation, eco-DRR, that sort of work you were talking about day 1 and day 2. But commitment 2 is really green response. And I'll read out commitment 2 just so you're sure. Maximize the environmental sustainability of our work and rapidly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so the charter is now really the foundational commitment, I think, for the Red Cross for this area. But there's a few other reasons, practical reasons about green response or being more environmentally sustainable. Okay, I mentioned those commitments. If your national society has signed the charter, then to be honest, it's time to get busy on this theme of green response. But this also gives you credibility with donors and partners. And we get very clear messages about this from our major donors now. So, for example, if you're making a proposal to your donor and you're able to say, well, we're taking this subject seriously, we're starting to develop an environmental policy, we're doing this, we're doing that. This gives you credibility with your donors. And we know that donor expectations are heading this direction. I'll refer a lot to ECHO today because we've done a lot of work in the last year and a half with ECHO as ECHO developed their new environmental principles and requirements for donors. So ECHO is now requiring their partners to do environmental screening of their humanitarian projects. And I'll explain that in more detail. And ECHO is now prepared to fund some greening costs. So ECHO is prepared to accept up to 10% of a proposal budget for ECHO humanitarian funding for greening initiatives. And that can have a whole range of things, from the sort of wash interventions that Swedish Red Cross was talking about in Bangladesh, all the way to logistics type work. This could help you to position yourself well with government authorities and ministries and other local actors, your Ministry of Environment, things like that. And it could also be helping you to comply with your own national legislation and regulations. A good example here is that we see more and more bans in countries of single-use plastics. And we've seen some examples in Africa where relief items have been held up at ports as they enter the country because they're wrapped in single-use plastic, and that is now illegal in that country. And finally, it can lead to cost savings. And we're seeing more evidence from other humanitarian actors, from ICRC, where particularly use of solar energy is a good example, actually saves you money over the long term, as opposed to using diesel generators, whether that's in your programming, like WASH programming, or whether that's for your own offices, your warehouses. It doesn't matter. It actually leads to cost savings in the long term. Okay, in practical terms, green response, let's break it down a little bit here. So green response is, first of all, reducing our carbon emissions or our greenhouse gas emissions. So this is climate change mitigation. So in a global sense, how can we reduce our carbon emissions, okay, and therefore our future contribution to further climate change? But equally important is the local environmental perspective. So how can we make sure that our programs and operations don't cause damage to the local environment? This could be through pollution, poor waste management, plastic waste. It could be deforestation, which is a kind of a side effect of our programming. Other forms of environmental degradation. Perhaps we're just not using natural resources responsibly, whether it's water or land or forests. And finally, the third part is, can we see if there's a net benefit to the environment from our humanitarian activities where that's possible? Okay, it's not the primary objective of green response, but let's see where we can look for positive environmental impact as well. So this would be through things like integrating the nature-based solutions you talked about yesterday, more environmentally sustainable aspects of livelihoods, of WASH, of shelter. And if those first two are really about doing no harm to the environment, and sometimes you see this idea of green response expressed as extending the do no harm principle to the environment. We need to protect the environment. So these first two are really about that, do no harm to the environment, or this idea of environmental responsibility. But if we can go a bit further, if it's appropriate, and it might not always be appropriate in every project or operation, if we can go a bit further and have a net benefit onto the environment, then we're really talking about environmental sustainability here. So my main message here is, green response is not only about reducing carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, that's very important, the climate perspective, climate change mitigation, but let's also focus on the local environmental impacts as well. It's really both of those together. Now, I found in working on this theme in the last year and a half almost, that it's helpful to break down green response into three different components, some of which you already heard about this morning. Now, the lines between these are not black and white. They're a bit blurred, which I think Arno hinted at before, but it helps us to understand, I think. So first, the institutional level, the green transformation of your organization, whether it's us, IFRC Secretariat, or your national society. I call it institutional greening. Some years ago, people were calling it green the red, which we actually stole from the United Nations because they talk about greening the blue. But essentially here, we're talking about measuring and then reducing the environmental footprint of the whole organization. Okay, that includes your carbon footprint, greenhouse gas emissions. So this is really looking at your offices, your logistics, your vehicles, your travel policy, all the way down to how people get to the office and how you use paper and these sorts of things. Secondly is the logistics and supply chain. The reason why we really separate this out is because it's such a substantial part of green response, actually. We know from the carbon emissions baselines of IFRC, of Spanish Red Cross, of some other humanitarian organizations, we know that most of our carbon emissions come from the logistics and supply chain function, okay? From the procurement, storage, transportation and distribution of relief items and other materials we may use in our programming. We also know that a lot of our contribution to waste, pollution, plastic waste is also coming from logistics and supply chain. So it's a really important part. We've seen that 60 to 70% of ICRC's carbon emissions come from the supply chain, okay? They don't come from staff travel and our own vehicles. They come from the rest of logistics and supply chain. So it's a big piece of work. And the third element is on the ground in the programs and operations themselves. And this is that element of avoiding environmental impact on the ground. And one critical thing is doing environmental screening of our projects, programs, and operations. And I will explain what we mean by that a bit later. Okay. I want to mention something called the Green Response Environmental Quick Guide. I'll introduce it now. That's the front cover. It's a new tool we have. I've spent a lot of time the last 9 months developing this with great support from the Green Response Working Group. Kanika and Swedish Red Cross is one of the colleagues who was helping with this. I'll be referring to this a lot. The link is down there, but don't worry, I will share it. I'll share it in the chat box. And this explains everything about green response. And it has many links in there and tools. It has practical examples from national societies. So if I'm going through some things quite fast, don't worry, you'll see everything in the Green Response Environmental Quick Guide later, whether it's the institutional level, the logistics level, the programming, the wash, the shelter, it's all there. Now, how to implement green response. I talked about it having those three broad components, but I want to go into more detail now and build this up layer by layer and tell you about some of the tools we have. And after that, I will give you some practical national society examples. So first, the institutional level side, okay? We have to walk the talk. We have to look inside at ourselves as organizations and start that green transformation, okay? Then logistics and supply chain, very important, looking at the greening of logistics. Then we start at the programmatic level. We need to think about environmental screening of projects. What that means is simply understanding the local environmental context that we're working in and analysing if our planned interventions, our projects, our activities might have an impact on the environment, okay? It also means when we do emergency needs assessments that we need to consider the environment when we're gathering secondary data, okay, to make sure we gather some information from the government, from other environmental organizations, so we understand a little bit about the local environment. We don't need to be environmental experts. That's important. Then we look at our sectors. Can we understand and promote what the sectoral green innovations are? Now, we just heard a lot about WASH from Swedish Red Cross. That's fantastic. I see most of our progress in WASH and in shelter in particular, but also elements happening in the health sector and the livelihood sector as well. So there's good work happening, and as generalist people working in disaster management, disaster risk management, it's good we all know what the green innovations are in shelter and WASH and the other sectors, so we can encourage them and promote them, and indeed demand them from our sectoral colleagues. Then we can think about integrating cross-cutting environmental initiatives in our projects and operations. Now, these are some initiatives which can address key environmental issues, but we've not been good at addressing them as humanitarian organizations because they don't fit within one sector. They don't fit within just wash or just shelter or just health. And so we've kind of ignored them up till now. And I'll explain about some of those. And the last level is the community awareness raising level. We have so much opportunity as the Red Cross with our volunteer base to really be advocates for positive environmental and climate behaviors, okay? So I would hope that we could in future be always integrating some element of community awareness raising into our work. Doesn't matter which sector we're working in, there's always scope to talk about the local environment and local environmental challenges. This is not sequential. I mean, you don't have to do this step by step. We have some national societies who started with at the institutional level and started with a policy. We have other national societies who've just started by doing green things in their shelter or their wash, okay? You can work on all of these at the same time, all right? I'm going to go through some of these in some more detail. I'll go a little bit slower, a little bit faster, just looking at the clock here. But the institutional level, what's really involved here? You need to develop an environmental policy or some kind of commitment from your board, from your senior leadership that you want to be greener. We have one as IFRC Secretariat, and we think national societies should have one. You need to allocate people and resources. Someone has to be responsible for these things within your national society, otherwise you won't make progress. You need to think about measuring carbon emissions, but you also need to think about measuring other aspects of your environmental footprint. And usually as a minimum, this would be waste and your water and energy usage. So carbon emissions, waste, water, energy. And then understanding your footprint, you set targets and action plans to reduce it. And ideally, you can have an action plan for every office, okay, every branch. Now, this can be as simple or as complicated as you like, okay? So small national societies shouldn't be afraid. This can start very, very simply on how your office might reduce the waste or recycle your waste or reduce energy consumption or things like that. And we also promote that in the National Society preparedness work, in the PER approach, preparedness for effective response, that environment can be integrated into that. Now let's talk about tools. I'm pleased to say we do now have some new tools. We have a new environmental policy toolkit, which is to help national societies to develop an environmental policy. Yesterday, I just received a link from Spanish Red Cross. They've done some great work through their Red Cross Mediterranean Center, and it's now available online. It's called Reduction. It's an online carbon footprint calculator for national societies. Really nice, simple, easy to use tool, and there's lots of kind of learning and advocacy there as well. But we are also part of an interagency project that ICRC is leading. We are part of, some other national societies are part of, and a common carbon emissions accounting tool for the humanitarian sector is being developed as we speak. IFRC Secretariat, we're about to pilot using this in the rest of this year and try and measure our carbon emissions for the first time. So this tool will be available for all humanitarian organizations to use next year. We have a new PER annex, so for the National Society preparedness side of things, on environmental sustainability. And there is also a checklist, the Red Goes Green checklist, which was from some work done by Swedish Red Cross a couple of years ago. What's involved in going green as an organization? What are some of the challenges you need to overcome? We don't yet have tools, sadly, to help to measure your waste, water, and energy usage as a national society or at office level, but we'll be developing these over the coming years. Okay, logistics and supply chain, the greening work there is about sustainable procurement and how you work with your suppliers, doing local procurement where that's appropriate, where you think the environmental footprint of local production is greener than importing. It's also about the specifications of the NFIs or relief items or materials you buy. Can we actually have greener specifications and purchase more sustainable products? Can we reduce or optimize the plastics? Remove the single-use plastics from everything we buy, and reduce or optimize the packaging. It's also about fleet and how we can save fuel and therefore reduce carbon emissions from our fleet and other aspects. So there's a lot of work going on with our Movement Sustainable Supply Chain Alliance. I'll talk about that shortly. But we do have a new sustainable procurement guide. It's just been released by ICRC, and we're going to adapt that soon for national societies. And ICRC and IFRC have looked at the 12 most important relief items, or NFIs, in the emergency items catalogue, and there's now some documentation there about more sustainable criteria. So what does it mean to buy a greener blanket or tarpaulin or kitchen set? So some work has been done there, and some work has been done about vehicle optimization. What are the best vehicles to use? And not just electric vehicles, but in terms of internal combustion engines, which vehicles do we recommend that national societies use? Then we go to the project level, environmental screening and needs assessments. So we need to think about considering the environment as one of the factors in our emergency needs assessments. And then we need to really move on this idea of environmental screening, because donors are starting to require this. So screening all our projects for environmental risks and potential impacts, using a tool like the NEAT Plus, which Swedish Red Cross talked about, and I'll talk about a little bit more. We do have a guidance note, it's available. The links are all in this presentation, so you'll have the links available to you, but these links are also all in the Green Response Environmental Quick Guide. So we have a guidance note about when you're doing emergency needs assessments, how you can integrate environmental sustainability. We have the NEAT Plus tool. It's an interagency tool to use. And we have the new Green Response Environmental Quick Guide, which explains this idea of environmental screening. So it's really important, this idea of thinking about the environment when we assess, plan, and design our projects, whether they're humanitarian or they're longer term, it doesn't really matter. Then we can think about promoting the sectoral green interventions. Now, these are just some examples. I won't go into details. Shelter, increasingly our shelter colleagues are really looking at eco-design when there's construction involved, green construction, using sustainable materials, reusing disaster debris, bricks, timber from collapsed housing, and also life cycle analysis, looking at construction materials from cradle to grave and looking at their carbon emissions and the waste issues and things like that. WASH, I won't say too much more because you heard about some of the great examples already today. Livelihoods, looking into more climate smart agriculture. Cash and voucher assistance, considering the environment better when we're doing market assessments for cash programming. We need to know what people can buy, and if they can only buy very poor quality, environmentally harmful products, then we really need to think about that when we're proposing cash assistance. There's many guides, there's a lot of tools related to different sectors, but I would highlight the new Green Response Environmental Quick Guide as a good umbrella tool that you can go to that references lots of other tools. Integrating cross-cutting environmental initiatives. I mentioned that these are truly cross-cutting and they're not owned by any one sector, which is why we've struggled to work on these in the past. Waste management. This whole idea of reducing waste, recycling, the circular economy, that waste can have value. This is really cross-sectoral, multi-sectoral, and it would be good to see how we can integrate this into our other projects and operations as something small on the side, you know, helping communities to collect waste, segregate waste, compost organic waste, recycling the plastics and the glass, that kind of stuff. Household energy. How do people cook their food? It's particularly a big issue in refugee camps, and particularly, but not only in Africa. We know that more than half of the world's population is still cooking over an open fire using generally wood. And this is clearly a problem for deforestation. So we need to be thinking in some context, and this happened in Cox's Bazar population movement, thinking about sustainable fuels, fuel-efficient cook stoves and things like that. And the third one is this intersection of green response with DRR, nature-based solutions, livelihoods, this idea of ecosystem management and restoration, reforestation, tree planting. It's not the main message of green response, but in many operational programming contexts, it might be very appropriate to integrate something to do with restoring the local environments or replanting trees or something like that, okay? And finally, the tools available here, again, the Green Response Environmental Quick Guide. There's a great guide from Swedish Red Cross from a couple of years ago for the whole Red Cross on managing solid waste for all sectors. How can you manage your waste better? And you have the Nature Navigator, of course. You talked about this yesterday with nature-based solutions. And the last one, community awareness raising. We've heard from others about how important this is, that we can see national societies doing public campaigns for behavior change, you know, the beach cleanups, pollution, things like that, advocating with local authorities. But I would hope that in future, we are always integrating into our community projects, again, whether they're humanitarian or longer term, we're always integrating some aspect of awareness raising on good environmental practices, and that we're training our volunteers to be environmental advocates. Tools here, we have some work to do, I must confess. We want to develop some PAPE style materials, the public education, public awareness materials. We have them for DRR. We'd like to supplement those with some materials specifically about environment and climate change. But we do have the climate training kit from the Climate Centre, you have the Y Adapt, but we feel that we need to have a bigger set of tools for national societies so that they can easily integrate this awareness raising into any project. Okay, let me just pause for some water. A couple of quick slides before I get onto some national society examples. This institutional greening, just once again, I want to remind you that this new environmental policy toolkit is here. So please promote this with your national society. It's a multi-year process probably to develop an environmental policy or a green policy, but it will require people to start to promote this idea. And in terms of measuring carbon emissions, do go and have a look at this new tool just released from Spanish Red Cross, Reduction. And do be aware that next year there will be this common carbon accounting tool for the whole humanitarian sector to use. And we'll be using it as IFRC Secretariat, and it will be available for any national society to use free of charge, okay? In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over that. I want to talk about the logistics briefly, greening logistics and supply chain. I want you to know that there is something called the Sustainable Supply Chain Alliance, ICRC, IFRC. It's led by ICRC, but we are part of it. I'm actually on the steering committee for this, and it's a multi-year, multi-project initiative to improve the sustainability of our logistics work, okay? Please, Federation colleagues, logistics colleagues, if you're on the line, please do get involved in this and do follow what's going on. There are many projects involved. I won't go through them all, but this is where the Common Carbon Accounting Tool project comes from, that ICRC is leading on. It's this work on sustainable procurement. You know, how do you work with your suppliers to green the supply chain? This is where they've developed this sustainability guidelines for the main NFIs and relief items. There's even research projects together with the UN looking at a more eco-design for the tarpaulin. Can we have a greener tarpaulin? And a greener polypropylene food aid bag, you know, these big polypropylene plastic sacks, which are used all around the world. There's also lots of work on fleet, on vehicles, on vehicle workshops and things like that. So do be aware that there's some good global work going on between ICRC and IFRC on logistics and supply chain. and we'll be translating that into an easy to understand format for national societies by the end of this year. And environmental screening. This is at the program level. It's important that we understand what this is because it's such a critical step in green response when we're working on the ground. We need to understand the local environmental sensitivities of where we're doing our programming and have some understanding of how our activities might impact the environment. The point about this environmental screening is it's not an environmental impact assessment. It's not an environmental assessment. It's meant to be something short and simple and done by non-experts, by humanitarians like you and me. And indeed, this is being increasingly requested by donors, and ECHO now mandates this for any shelter or wash project, and they intend in a couple of years that ECHO will require environmental screening to be done for your whole humanitarian program. You can do it in a manual way, environmental screening, by just kind of analyzing what you're bringing in, what your projects are bringing into the environment and what they're taking out of the environment. But there are also tools like the NEAT+, the Nexus Environmental Assessment Tool. Although I heard that Kanika from Swedish Red Cross was saying it's not necessarily as easy to use as you think, but it's designed to be used by humanitarians in humanitarian contexts, and it's not a complex multi-day process. And the NEAT+ can be used handheld or in Excel or online in the cloud. You answer some questions, a lot of questions about the environment and about your interventions. And it highlights some environmental risks, and it gives you some recommendations of steps you can take to reduce the environmental impact or possibly maximize environmental benefits. Experience with this, Swedish Red Cross has tried using this with several national societies in recent years, also in Lebanon. I know our colleagues from Lebanese Red Cross are also on the line. ICRC is starting to use this in the MENA region. Many INGOs are using this. We have other partner national societies like the French, the Norwegians, the Austrians are starting to use this together with their partner national societies. And it's IFRC under our global new 3-year ECHO PPP project. We're using this in the Americas, and the feedback from national societies is very positive. We've used it in Honduras, and as we speak, another 4 to 5 national societies are using it in the Americas region. And the feedback is pretty positive. And we've actually developed a simple approach to how you build capacity and pilot using the NEAT+ tool. Okay, I'll skip over that. I'm going to go through a few examples. These examples are from the Green Response Environmental Quick Guide. And there are many more examples in there. So this will just give you a flavor of some of these, some of the greening work. And then we will stop, and I hope my colleague Pascal will help to facilitate a discussion. So first of all, the institutional greening. Costa Rica Red Cross in the Americas, a great example of a national society who's quite advanced. They've had for some years an environmental management policy. They have the support from right from the top, from the board, from the leadership, that this issue of environmental sustainability is a priority. It's integrated into the disaster management strategy. And they're part of their government's Blue Flag initiative. You can see the graphic there, although it's in Spanish. But under the Blue Flag initiative, every branch, every office of the National Society measures their waste, water, and energy usage and their carbon emissions, and they have to report on it every year. And they have action plans for how they try to reduce it. So Costa Rica is a great example of a national society who's really moving on the institutional greening. Here's an example of solar energy in a national society office, the Bahamas in the Caribbean. Hurricane Dorian struck in 2019. There was a big recovery program, multi-year recovery program, and they were fortunate to be able to allocate some funds to install solar energy in the headquarters office, in the capital. It was a $70,000 US dollar investment, but the good news is that the payback period for this is estimated to be 5 years. So after 5 years, the National Society will start to save $14,000 a year on the energy costs of its headquarters office. So it's a good idea how solarization or reduction of carbon emissions and move to renewable energy was integrated into a recovery program. Now, they were fortunate that the recovery program was well funded. Okay, the operation was well funded. Let's go to Kenya Red Cross in Africa, and let's think about waste management, recycling. Dadaab refugee camp, before the Cox's Bazar crisis, Somalian refugees in Kenya. In 2016, Kenya Red Cross started this plastic recycling project. It has spread from the camp to the host community around the camps, and the communities collect plastic waste. It's sorted. They have some machines to crush or to shred the plastic waste, depending on the type of plastics, and then it's sold to a private recycling company. So this is really the circular economy principle in action. Waste can have value. And the beautiful thing about this project is it's livelihoods. It generates income. It employs people. So it's actually a small business which has trained and employs 16 staff from the refugee and host communities. Green procurement. Here's an example at the global level from ICRC and IFRC, plastic waste in our relief items. So for the last few years, we've been reducing the plastic packaging and single-use plastics in kitchen sets, tarpaulins, jerry cans. And this is saving around about 14 million plastic bags a year, or 53 tons of plastic. Look at the before and after photos. This is the kitchen set. Before, a mountain of plastic that every item was wrapped in. After, no single-use plastic, no plastic bags, and it's only biodegradable cardboard that's used. It's pretty easy to do this. It doesn't cost you money. You work with your suppliers, and you have an immediate impact. On the programmatic level, I don't need to go through these two examples here because they're actually from Cox's Bazar about WASH, so I won't repeat them. Just to say that Bangladesh Red Crescent has been doing the green fecal sludge management in many camps with support of IFRC, Swedish Red Cross, British Red Cross, and it's great. This biodigester technology, it's clean, it's green, it's solar power, and you can actually produce fertilizer as a byproduct. But to add to what Swedish Red Cross already told you today, this technology is now being used in other countries, and it was even used in Germany by German Red Cross last year after the floods. So amazing to think the work that was developed in Bangladesh was taken and used in Germany, where the local authorities were very, very impressed with what German Red Cross was doing. And similarly, the use of solar power for water pumping. It's quite common now around the world. You can buy solar water pumps as a unit. And of course, they save you a lot of money from diesel. You're not running diesel generators. There's less pollution. There's less noise. We're seeing it a lot in WASH projects in Africa. And it's fast becoming the way that we do things in WASH. Here's looking at household energy in Africa, in Namibia. This was a Spanish Red Cross project with Namibia Red Cross promoting construction of fuel-efficient cooking stoves. This is a community that was cooking over an open fire. They developed with the community something called the elephant cook stove. It's made from local materials, clay, soil, sand, ash, and straw. And compared to cooking over the open fire, it uses 50 to 60% less firewood. So it's really an environmental win in terms of avoiding deforestation and cutting down of trees. But it's also a big winner in terms of health because it's reducing the smoke pollution that, in particular, women and children were suffering. Let's look at the fleet, at vehicles. Costa Rica Red Cross, again. They went through a fleet development project. They have 700 vehicles, 544 ambulances in Costa Rica Red Cross. They went through a project which involved a vehicle tracking system and more fuel-efficient driving and driver training no electric vehicles, but they have achieved a 19% decrease in fuel consumption and therefore greenhouse gas emissions, and a saving of $113,000 a year from their fleet costs. Okay, so there was some investment up front, but it paid back very quickly. Community awareness. This is from the Pacific, from our friends, Australian Red Cross, Vanuatu Red Cross, and the Climate Centre. It's an animated video series of the Pacific adventures of the climate crash. Just an example of tools to help communities understand and address the environment and climate crises. And the last example I will give you, it's actually about ERUs, emergency response units. It's work done by Canadian Red Cross, who maintains a health emergency response unit, a field hospital. These are huge things, very expensive, lots of people, lots of equipment, heavy environmental impact, lots of carbon emissions. So what Canadian Red Cross has been doing is doing an environmental impact study, and particularly carbon emissions study of the ERU, both the preparedness side and then the actual response side when the ERU is deployed. And they have a number of recommendations on the table now about how they can reduce the environmental and carbon footprint of their ERU. Okay, through many ways, about the sustainability of the equipment they purchase, how to reduce air travel, using solar energy in the field when the hospital is deployed, and things like that. Wrapping up very quickly now, we have a Green Response Working Group. Thanks. It's our informal network across the Red Cross movement, because ICRC is there as well to promote green response. Was started by Swedish Red Cross. We really have big thanks to Swedish Red Cross, Canadian and Australian Red Cross for keeping this going over the last 10 years. And we are now leading this as the IFRC Secretariat. So if you want to get involved in this and follow along, please do contact me. And that's another slide with my email address. And indeed, on our website, we do have a green response page with some resources there. Right, let me stop sharing. I talked a lot. I hope that gave you a better idea of what's involved with green response and how we see it. And it's given you an idea of some of the practical examples that national societies are working on. You can find more in the Green Response Environmental Quick Guide. I'll give you the link shortly. And I'm going to hand over to Pascal Boucher, who is our Green Response focal point for Asia Pacific region. And I'm sure there's some questions in the chat, and I'm sure that Pascal will lead a little discussion for us now.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks a lot for your presentation. Very informative as always. Maybe since it was a very comprehensive presentation with a lot of ideas, a lot of tools. Wait, I'm a little bit too much light here. Okay, with you presented new also not only the Green Response Initiative, but the recently developed tools. So I think there was a lot of information. So there might be questions from participants. So I'll just open maybe the floor. If there's any question on any particular aspect of Richard's presentation. You can raise your hand or you can go ahead directly.
Since nobody is coming,
okay.
Take a chance. No, I think, Richard, we have been changing a lot on these things through email, so it was wonderful to hear from you. And I really appreciate lots of great examples. I was just thinking, like, when you talk about behavior change and awareness raising, I think we have been doing this since decade and decade. And it is one of the toughest things that probably we have not achieved as we should have. But of course, we are making positive change somehow in that regard. But coming to a few examples, like, of course, you mentioned about the policies and some commitments at the state level probably is also required. We are talking about a policy within ourselves. Like, for example, if we are promoting do not use plastic, do not throw the waste on the street or properly manage. until there is solutions given to the community or to the people, even into the big city, this is not going to happen. And this is something like, for example, like only we as a humanitarian cannot do. We need a strong policy, a strong advocacy from the government, from the state party, and options for, like, don't throw the garbage. But where do I throw? If I'm walking 1 kilometer, I don't find anything there. It's the same thing we have been talking since many years about use toilet, don't do fecal sludge here and there without any public toilet, anything. But these new initiatives are coming. So I'm just thinking, like, in terms of behavior change at community level, I think people know that, okay, if we are producing lots of smoke, we are getting some health issues, we are degrading the environment, but still probably that level of understanding and commitment is not increasing. So one part is that I think we have to really put more effort. It is not really questions, more I think my contribution and just a comment. So something we have to really think seriously in terms of raising awareness and changing the behavior is one part, but at the same time also advocating to the state party to really adopt a strong policy. Sometimes there are a country like
something of value. And then the plastic waste can also have a value, even if there's no local recycling from the government. There's always private sector recyclers, even in the least developed countries in Africa. And we've seen that in a few countries in Africa, that national societies working to help communities collect plastic waste and sell it. So I think this idea that waste can have value, and that's maybe the message we can pass to communities in the absence of the government action, which is obviously a gap and will take time to develop.
Thank you, Richard. I think Mukesh raised a very good point, is that what is also the role of national society in terms of advocacy as an auxiliary to the government when it comes to reducing the impact on the environment. But thanks for this. The way maybe I propose to structure our discussion. Wait, I will share my screen because I'm not so used to Zoom. So 1 minute. Do you see Richard and Arnaud on the screen? Okay. Oh, good, yeah. So I mean, as a first question, and it's also to to let the participants also share their experience, because we have a lot of experienced colleagues who joined the call. But first, if you could share also some of the examples you have witnessed on the field of the negative impact of humanitarian operation, so that of course Richard didn't have the time to mention all the potential impact that an operation can have, but he mentioned very good ones, like for example during the tsunami operation. We would like to hear from you as well of a real example, and also for those that Richard maybe didn't have the time to mention. There is still more time during our discussion, Richard, if you want to mention any other kind of negative impact on the environment. So I really would like to encourage the colleagues who are joining the call to mention, now that you have listened to Richard, you might remember that you have witnessed a similar situation during operation. So I would like to first open the floor for colleagues who joined the call, who share very tangible examples. Arnaud, yes?
I just to let time for colleagues to think a little bit about it. But it rings a bell for me. 15 years ago or 20 years ago when I started, I discovered the PAM, or WFP, we say PAM in French, through, and I can name and shame it because they're not the Red Cross movement, through the plastic bags they were using to distribute food. And they were everywhere. I was in Cape Verde at that time, and you could find those bags everywhere, including remotely in the nature, and also boxes for milk, I think it was. There was with the logo everywhere.
Yes, I can also, waiting for colleagues, but I started also, like many of us, during the tsunami time, and whether it was in Thailand, Sri Lanka, or Indonesia, we all we've witnessed those programs with so many fishing boats, and of course the wood has to come from somewhere, and of course we collectively as humanitarian organizations have cut so much trees to build boats at that time, and turns out there was way more boats provided than actual fishermen. So that's hopefully that will not happen again. But yes, please, Ajar.
Hi, I just want to tell you about our food aid distribution. Previously, we changed the packaging from box to biodegradable bag, and it can be reusable for our community. But it seems like most of people say that it's not so reliable to use bag because of the items in the bag will be like a crash or leaking. So we changed back to boxes for packaging, and I think it is not so green, and it's also give us impact because boxes sometimes it's not very quality because of the thickness of the bags also can be questioned. So hopefully that we change it to another solution for our packaging. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajar. Maybe to go back to Richard, you were mentioning the cardboard boxes, and very good example from national societies in particular. And it seems like a pretty good solution. Can you confirm, Richard? You have to put the sound back, Richard.
Yep. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. There's quite a lot of work being done on this across the whole humanitarian sector, actually, about packaging reduction. We're part of a project together with ICRC and all the big UN agencies and INGOs on packaging reduction in the supply chain, which is funded by USAID. So I mean, this is seen as actually one of the relatively quick wins in the humanitarian sector to quickly reduce the single-use plastics, but also changing to biodegradable cardboard, or indeed making sure that the packaging has a second use. This is another point as well. If we actually provide packaging that has a practical purpose and can be used by targeted populations afterwards. A good idea is how sometimes the wash kits, they used to come packed separately, but now the hygiene kit comes packed inside the bucket. So the bucket is the container. You don't need any other packaging. The bucket is the container, and then the bucket obviously is a useful product. So there's also some work around mapping in the countries where there's a lot of humanitarian action, in mapping local recyclers. Okay, because usually the government is not able to meet the needs, and there's usually a lot of private companies. So there's work ongoing to help to link humanitarian organizations with local private recycling companies, so that it's much easier to actually collect the whatever plastic waste there is and have it recycled. So this is seen as really one of the kind of easier ways to improve the environmental sustainability of the logistics and supply chain work. Over.
Before going to Sarah, Ajar, do you want to also respond, or see if we can also continue the discussion bilaterally with the MRCS?
Yeah, I mean, I think what would be good, yeah, maybe we'll continue
on the relief item packaging. Yeah,
exactly. We'll make sure we can connect you to my green logistics colleague, so you can be aware of some of this global work and the Sustainable Supply Chain Alliance.
Well noted. We'll follow it up with Ajar and Richard after the call. Thank you very much. Sarah from the Senegalese Red Cross, is it?
Yes,
oh, no, sorry.
The Canadian Red Cross, but based in Dakar at the moment. I think the example, I apologize, it's quite early morning here still, so my apologies for that. But the examples I wanted to share were one around the waste that we create when we travel. Of course, Canada is quite a large country, and that is a significant problem for us. But the second example I wanted to share is about rebranding and the amount of waste that is produced when there has been rebranding within the Canadian Red Cross. There have been a lot of items thrown away because they can't be disposed of. They can't be given away, for example, or used because they no longer have the Canadian Red Cross brand as it should be, or as it's being kind of promoted. So that's waste that feels wrong because we throw out blankets, because we throw out, cots, all sorts of stuff. So that for me has been a bad example to share.
That's Thanks, Sarah. That's very concrete example. Can you just on the first one again for the you were mentioning the transport and move. You were talking about, for example, I don't know, people, Red Cross staff traveling. Is that what you were referring to?
It is, yes, and of course when big disasters do happen, for example, on the west coast of the country, we're often flying all sorts of people from all over the country to get there. But I think more so what I question is why we fly places and what we're flying there for. And I think the pandemic has made us question whether those movements are necessary any longer. But certainly I think flying is one of the biggest waste producers that we underestimate and that kind of could be reconsidered very easily.
Yes, thanks. And I think Richard also mentioned it at some point, but I mean, the pandemic has taught us, as you say, Sarah, is it worth, when you organize a regional meeting, flying, 100 people from a whole continent, for example? I mean, thinking of the carbon footprint that represent. And then the pandemic also taught us that, well, many of them are actually feasible online. But I don't know if Richard, you have also this kind of guidance as part of the green response, even if it's not really in the framework of an operation.
Well, actually, I just thanks to Sarah from Canadian Red Cross for those comments. And I just wanted to mention again Canadian Red Cross's own work looking at their environmental footprint of their health ERU, the field hospital, because actually they found one of the easiest ways they could reduce their carbon footprint was to reduce the flights for training purposes. Okay, so reduce the need for people to fly all around the world for the ERU training. And then also when the ERU is deployed, to increase the deployment length from 4 weeks to 6 weeks, because having everybody changing over every 4 weeks obviously means a lot more flights. So these were actually two of the easiest ways that they're thinking about to reduce the carbon footprint is related to the staff travel. But indeed, yeah, I think when we as IFRC Secretariat finally do our carbon emissions baseline, as I mentioned, we're just starting to do it now using this new tool, to pilot this tool. I hope that we will see some policies around travel. And I hope in future years for the IFRC Secretariat, and I hope that will lead to us to actually reducing our international travel, because certainly we've seen that, yeah, some travel is essential and some trainings and some workshops are, but we can probably reduce it significantly.
And if I can respond to
yeah,
briefly.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I am part of the Green Committee within the Canadian Red Cross, and as a management team, the team of rapid response managers that I'm a part of is very much looking to implement as much as we can some of these changes. So certainly, I would agree.
Thank you, Sarah. And your second comment, Sarah, it was also very interesting, and it reminded me of something that is quite common, especially in large operation, is the disposal of unwanted goods. Because this is very, very common, especially when you have, a lot of good intention also, domestically, and a lot of people donate goods that are not necessarily the one that needs to go to the affected people, but it can represent, I've seen it in some country, huge amount of unwanted good that need to be disposed by the national society. So Richard, would it be something that you would put also as in the relief item category?
Yeah, it's a good question, Pascal, about where it fits actually in the way that we are presenting green response, and the new way we're presenting green response. I'll have to think about that. But we certainly saw this recently with the Ukraine crisis. And it was a very clear message from our logistics colleagues who have been doing their best to implement some of these green principles. You might be aware in Europe, in the neighbor, of course, huge flow of refugees from Ukraine to all the surrounding countries. And in all of those European countries, there were huge amounts of unsolicited donations. So of materials, of clothes, of this, of that, from the public, from companies. And actually this has always been a problem for our logistics colleagues, because it makes more work for them and costs money, because these things have to sometimes be repacked and, transported on, and they're not really the priority items that we need. But what they were highlighting this time is the waste problem, because actually what was happening is people were donating things which were just not needed and were not of use, and the national societies couldn't distribute them. So it was actually just generating another mountain of waste. So they quickly started to advocate with the public and local actors, please stop donating this stuff. What we need is, we need money, actually. We don't need clothes and shoes and this and that. So it's really an issue we've seen this year in the Ukraine crisis.
That's a good point. And also, I think in terms of public image, I know that I can think of a few national societies who have, been under criticism in their country because they had to dispose of goods that were donated by the people. So that can be a little bit tricky. So if there was a way also to recycle, for example, the unwanted goods, that could be a double advantage, I would say. Also in terms of public image. Do we have any? It's a very good example. Thanks. Okay, so it's recording in progress now. All right. Any other example, or I would say bad example, or example of negative impact on the environment from operation? Otherwise, we can go already to the second point. I don't know if colleagues want to take a break. Arnaud, you let me know what was in the plan, but if it's fine for colleagues to continue.
And I think this is interesting. No.
Yeah,
I think this is an interesting discussion.
I agree. Let's have 10-15 minutes if you're okay. It's very nice to have you to have all this very practical and tangible experience, and we can exchange a little bit for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll close, if it's okay for everybody.
Okay. Then I suggest we go to the good examples that you may have witnessed in your national societies, for example, or other actors, it doesn't matter, on, let's say, environmentally sustainable actions to reduce the impact on the environment. So you can think also according to your sector. If we have logistic colleagues, shelter colleague, WASH, or people involved in relief item distribution, I'm sure you may have a good example to share that we may not have yet in the Environment Quick Guide. So that's also, it's a living document, this guide. So the more good examples we have, the better. So Once again, the floor is yours. Please don't hesitate to share the good examples. I don't see hands yet. Maybe Arnaud can start also with the good example now that you've mentioned the bad ones.
Yeah, give me a minute to think about it. I would like something to be very good.
If you like, while people are thinking, I could show. Arnaud, you're about to speak.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. I was very interested by the Cox's Bazar examples of recycling of fecal sludge and urine also, and I had witnessed some of those activities also that are very difficult to implement because of the acceptance of the population. So that's I think a very good example. But how to work on this acceptance is, I think, a key questions for those things. But please go ahead with the good examples.
Well, I was actually just going to say I could show one or two examples, other examples from the quick guide, if while people are having a think, if that's useful for a couple of minutes.
I mean, there's one in the quick guide that I find very simple when you think about it, and I'm sorry if you mentioned it, Richard, already, but simply the cash as a modality is actually a very simple modality to avoid a lot of negative impact. So it's not only the relevance of the action, but also the limitation of the negative impact.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, excuse me, cash assistance. It's an interesting one. The message we're kind of giving, and it's actually our cash colleagues and also the cash hub for the membership, which British Red Cross hosts. We're also starting to highlight that obviously it would seem that cash is a greener option, generally speaking, because we reduce the supply chain activities. We give people cash, we don't purchase, store, transport, distribute relief items. But it does require a bit more thought about environment, about the local markets and the products that are available on local markets. So when we're doing market assessments for cash programming, it's important to think a little bit about the environmental perspective. So what can people buy? But it really depends country to country. In some country, there might be good local production of all the items you need, that the beneficiaries need. It's great. Why would we want to import those, bring them into the country and drive them around the country when we can give people money and they can buy them locally? That would be a greener option. There are some other countries, though, where it might not be the greenest option, in particular in some countries in Africa where everything is imported, and sometimes the quality of what's available on local markets is quite poor. So it's not as black and white as we think. But generally speaking, promoting cash and voucher assistance is also, in most contexts, probably going to be a greener option.
But thanks, Richard, for explaining also the subtlety. Kostub, please. I hope I pronounce your name well.
Yeah,
please
Pascal,
go ahead.
I think your pronunciation is quite right. Thanks. Again, I want to actually revisit the example of Cox's Bazar. I don't remember if this point was touched upon, but in the new system of fecal sludge management or the wastewater treatment, they have used gravity to avoid the use of pumps. And that is, from my point of view, that is a really good example where, because this system will be used over a longer period, now there is no consumption of fuel for certain activities. So naturally, with the gravity, this wastewater flows, and that is one of the, I would say that one of the best practices that you can find. Thank you.
Thank you, Kostub. Is there any other You know, good example from colleague. Jacinto? Yes, Jacinto, you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you. From my side, I am in Togo currently, and from my side, I think that CLTS, community-led total sanitation, is also a good example for me. And in Togo, for example, we have mother clubs and local communities, local committees, which take the leadership in that kind of action. So I think it is sustainable. The second example is about Blue Schools, which is another actions we are promoting in Togo, and it's this improve. I mean, school children in their taken to support them or train them to take how to manage water and the environment during their school academic year, and also when they will be old people. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacinto. I think it's more related to the last part that Richard was mentioning, which was more about community awareness and practices. Arnaud, please go ahead.
Thank you. No, just a last example, which also relates to all of us within office work. Once I had a job in an office where somebody was in charge at night, I think it was the building manager, to look if we had any light open. And in the morning, you would get an email telling you that you let the light on. And believe me, you don't want to have that email. I mean, everybody's receiving it. And I think it's also, yeah, it's kind of the small things we can do in an office, waste management, but also this kind of things to have a system that reminds everybody how to really follow the rules and to be eco-friendly as much as possible.
I think it's a good example, Arno. And I mean, I know, for example, we have in the Federation the whole eco-driving, you know, guidelines, but I was wondering if we have also, maybe I should know that, but simple practices in the office.
Mm-hmm.
Richard, do we have those? And if we do,
No.
I apologize, I don't know them.
Actually, to be honest, Pascal, we don't have those materials, but we are starting to develop them now. So that's this idea to have a more comprehensive set of awareness-raising materials. One, for the National Society to use themselves for their own staff, volunteers, branches, officers. So it's those sort of things you're talking about, and also the ones to use at community level. So we did realize that this is a bit of a gap. We don't intend to reinvent the wheel because a lot of this stuff is available externally. We just need to bring it, you know, make it a whole package and give it the kind of Red Cross treatment, if you like. But yeah, there are some, I'm not necessarily an expert in this area, but in reading about it, there's really easy ways that we can, just like that, save 10, 15% of our energy consumption and all of our offices and branches. And that's, you know, that's pretty significant. It's pretty significant and not that difficult to do with a little bit of education of staff and volunteers and a little bit of behavior change. And the good news for our management, our leadership is that's money. That translates into cost savings. And this is where sometimes we don't need to make sure green response doesn't get stuck with people saying, oh, it costs money to be green. some things do, yes, but a lot can be done without spending any money, and that can actually realize cost savings as well.
Thank you, Richard. And before giving the floor to Kanika, it's something I wanted maybe to discuss in the third point, which is benefits and challenges. And that's also a good time to demystify some of the, the green response, as you say, the preconception that going green costs money, while actually in many cases, as you showed earlier, Richard, it's actually often it can save money. And when we are presenting good example to national society, I think it's really important to show what is the benefit of going green for the national society also. Kanika, please go ahead.
Thank you, Pascal. I just wanted to come in really quickly after what Richard said there and say that, actually what I found is that so many of our national societies around the world actually have some of these kind of like quick guides or little posters that they keep up in terms of, how they can green some of their own internal practices. I know that the Lebanese Red Cross was with us today. They have done some of these things. I know the Costa Rican Red Cross, they have done some of these things as well. So I think we need to be better also as a movement to share. And I think this is also another call for the Green Response Working Group that, please join us and share your ideas, because we all move together with these really small steps. And that's what we've found at the Swedish Red Cross as well, that it doesn't need to be big solar panel projects that we do as Green Response. It can be really small things like not having disposable coffee cups in the office, that you always have reusable coffee cups, and that makes a big difference. Or even just changing the way the type of water we're drinking in the office. So in the Swedish Red Cross office in Beirut, we have moved to a water filtration system rather than bringing in bottles of water. That's a big change. It means that's a lot of plastic that we're not putting out into the world. So yeah, I just say that.
Thank you very much, Kanika. As you say, I mean, the beauty of the movement also is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because there's always most likely a sister national society who have developed something. So it's true. I mean, in the office, I would also question the many of our offices where we have the AC full blast all day, but anyway. Okay, so maybe we can go to the third point if there's no more example. I think it would be interesting to hear from you. What do you think would be the benefits for national societies, and also the challenges, and how to address them in implementing those kind of environmentally sustainable measures? As Richard has rightly mentioned in his presentation, there are many practices that actually can cut cost instead of being expensive, even though there is still this preconception. But I think in the Environment Quick Guide, or when we discuss with national society, it's so important to highlight those benefits. Richard, maybe if you can start the discussion with 2 or 3 very simple benefits. I know you've mentioned some already, but very simple benefits, not necessarily only financial, but benefits from national society in going green. So that is not only constraint, but it can go much beyond that.
Yeah, so we mentioned the cost saving part, which certainly can come from using renewable energy and reducing travel and things like that. There's some pretty obvious wins there, but also we see for example, in shelter programming, if we're really emphasizing using locally sourced materials and sustainable materials, and also if it's a post-disaster, reusing disaster debris, meaning the rubble from previous housing or structures. I mean, all of these actually reduce the cost of the recovery effort of the reconstruction, and so you actually wind up with being able to do more with your money as well. I think the other thing to re-emphasize, I mentioned in my presentation, but it's also about the reputation and credibility of the national society. So I think this is important, as we know, how the national society is positioned in your country, your credibility with partners and donors and government partners. So if you're seen to be taking some action, okay, at least some symbolic action, and you're starting on this process, it's a good signal to your partners, your government, your donors. And that obviously helps in terms of, fundraising and reputation and things like that. So I think it's also good to think about that side of things as well. Over.
Yes, thanks, Richard. And I wanted to maybe continue the discussion on this last point in particular. Well, the public image and donors' requirement. I mean, we all know and agree that from now on and more in the future, we won't be able to present a proposal to a donor if we cannot demonstrate that we've done everything possible to reduce the impact on the environment. Therefore, if a national society can already start showing it, as part of the system and demonstrate it in action, there's also more chances, I assume, for donors to continue to provide fund to this national society. Maybe also I wanted to ask Richard, because you have more interaction with ECHO, and we know that ECHO is very much on top of this agenda. If from now on, that will be also a deal breaker with ECHO if we can't show in let's say a draft plan of action or an emergency appeal that we don't take green response in consideration.
That's definitely where ECHO is heading. So I will put in the chat the ECHO's new environmental principles and requirements. I think they're very useful to look at, whether you're from a sectoral perspective or just general DM or logistics. What ECHO has put there is a very good summary of, how to go green for a humanitarian organization. So what ECHO is saying at the moment is, this is kind of a piloting period, if you like. So they're not expecting all partners to be able to follow all the requirements from day one. This is not realistic. What they're saying now is that when they are evaluating proposals, so you submit a proposal and a budget to ECHO, when they are evaluating the different proposals and choosing which ones they will support, they are now taking into account the environmental side of things, the green response. It's one of the criteria that they will consider. So all other things being equal, with proposal from the Red Cross here and a proposal from, I don't know, an INGO here, if they both look pretty good on all factors, the one which is greener is going to get the money. That's what ECHO is telling us now, with the idea that in a couple of years from now, it will start to become more mandatory. They really expect that this stuff is in your proposals for ECHO funding.
Okay, thanks for the clarification, Richard. And since we're still talking about proposals and plans of action, normally it always starts with the assessment. And so I was wondering, since our new needs assessment is also a new needs assessment toolbox is in the pipeline at the Federation, is there also a possibility or to include or link with the Need Plus, for example, to be part of the package, so that already when the national societies have the toolbox for the needs assessment, the environmental assessment is included in it already, and it doesn't have to be necessarily added on top of it.
Yeah, that's the direction we're going down, more or less. And there is a guidance note and a short checklist about how you can integrate the environment into your needs assessments. So where might you get information from? Secondary data, and what sorts of information are you looking at? What type of information? Then the Need Plus, we tried to put this idea of environmental screening. It's not necessarily for the first weeks after a new disaster or crisis. So it's not necessarily part of the first round of needs assessments, because if you're doing environmental screening or using the NEAT Plus tool, you need to know more or less where you're working. So, you know, you need to know we're going to work in this province or this district in this area, and you need to have an idea already of what you're going to do. We're going to do this in health, or this in WASH, this in shelter, and then you can use the NEAT Plus tool to get an idea of what are the environmental risks you need to think about. So that we see the NEAT Plus and environmental screening as a little bit more linked to the stage of planning and detailed design, and especially in recovery, in protracted crises, you know, long-term refugee camps, these sorts of things is really where we see the need to use something like the NEAT Plus. But also that whatever type of assessment we're doing, needs assessment, emergency needs assessment, we need to think about the environment, and we need to have some understanding of the local environment. Because if this is a very water scarce area, or a deforested area, or the soil erosion and landslides is a major problem, then this already tells us a lot about what we need to do when we plan our shelter, our WASH, our this, our that. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And if I'm not mistaken, also the current needs assessment tool that we have doesn't look so much on the impact of a natural disaster, for example, on the environment. And that's something also that needs to be considered and integrated.
Yeah. So the assessment toolbox is still work in progress, as you mentioned. That's correct. And up till now, we've been a bit silent on this topic of the environment, right, and understanding the environment a little bit better. But we're also trying to not to scare people off, not to scare DM people off by saying, you know, the idea is we don't need to be environmental experts. There's plenty of tools out there. The point is just to have some general knowledge of the local environment and how it might be affected as humanitarians. So we don't want to scare people by suggesting we all need to become environmental experts. That's not the message.
Thank you, Richard. So I really would like to hear from other National Society colleagues in particular about potential challenges also. You know, what might, I mean, among the different measures that you've heard about, especially from Richard's presentation, you know, there might be challenges that we haven't thought about for national societies to go down that road. So it would be really good to hear from national society colleagues on this one. What do you see as potential challenges? Yes, Ajar, please go ahead.
Okay, we always talk about nature, about water, soil, deforestation, everything, but we forget about human being. We forget about ourselves, you know. For example, like most of in my office, for example, we have we not our working space is not like ergonomic, you know. Hey, okay, it's not ergonomic. So every time, like for example, like my table, is not suitable for computer, and it's only suitable for writing. So I have difficulty on to take care of my posture, take care of my health, and then I always have this kind of you know, shoulder ache and everything. So I'm hoping that we have something to do about this. We don't have to think about other nature, but sometimes we need to think about our self benefit. This is my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajar. And I think it's something that we have all observed and witnessed during the lockdown in particular, when working from home for hours and hours. Any other colleagues who would like to think of potential challenges or you know, current challenges, but something we might think of when it comes to going green and implement such measures? maybe I will ask again, Richard, if in the discussions you have already with National Society colleagues, what are the kind of answers that you've had from National Society colleagues explaining how difficult it might be for them to implement such measures?
Well, yeah, I guess we usually see a lack of champions and a lack of leadership from the top. So I think what I have seen is that it starts very personality driven. So it comes from some individuals in national societies, and for us in the Secretariat, who are passionate about this theme of the environment and try to convince their colleagues and try to push some changes ahead. But we know that real change for the organization won't happen unless it comes from the top and there's some real commitment from the top. So it's about trying to harness the energy of individuals to then convince the senior level to take up this topic and take it seriously and make it a priority of the organization. That's one thing. And then resources. People say, oh, we have no money. There's no money for this. But again, we need to challenge that because there's a lot that can be done that doesn't cost money, okay? Surely there are things that require investment. And it's not always easy to pay for solar energy for an office, for example, even though it will save you money in the future. But we all need to challenge that, and challenge our colleagues and say there's a lot that we can start to do, small steps that don't cost money. But these are the general challenges you hear about from organizations on the institutional greening side. I think on the programmatic side, good practices in shelter and wash, it's a bit more straightforward because I think donors now are more prepared to fund the options which are greener. If they cost a little bit more, they're more and more prepared to fund those ones now than they were a few years ago.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Maybe one quick question from my side, because you were mentioning the advocacy maybe to national society, and it starts by, well, who do we need to convince at the national societies? I think I know the answer maybe, but I guess we need to convince more to equally the leadership and as well as the people at technical level, because the kind of decisions will probably come from the leadership when it comes to policy level and approving some changes. We have a question in the chat from Dola, and Dola, if you don't mind just asking your question, if you're still online. Otherwise, I can ask your question directly. So Dola was asking the objective of the environment assessment is to evaluate the potential impact of a project on the environment, and she's asking, or he's asking, sorry, if the screening is part of the program or project, or basically if it has to be a separate entity or included as part of the project and therefore integrated as part of the assessment part of the project.
Yes, that's correct. First of all, I just want to repeat again, we're not talking about environmental impact assessments. That's a particular methodology. It's quite complicated. You need technical expertise. And we're not saying, and donors are not saying, and the humanitarian sector is not saying that we need to do environmental impact assessments for all of our projects. You might need to do it if you're building a health clinic, for example, or supporting reconstruction of 1,000 houses. But generally speaking, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that's part of the process of assessment and project design, where we're screening, doing this environmental screening. So we're just considering what's the local environment we're working in here with this livelihoods project or this WASH project or whatever it might be. and what impact might we have on the environment, and what can we do about that? Okay, so we are proposing to integrate something into like the project cycle, but it's important that we're not saying we need to do like separate standalone environmental impact assessments, because that's way too heavy for us as humanitarian organizations. I hope that
Thank you,
answers the
Richard.
question.
Yeah, very clearly. Sarah, please go ahead.
Last question, maybe for Sarah.
Yeah, last question, Sarah.
Oh, wow. Lots of pressure.
Yeah, must be a good one.
So my question, or I guess one of my concerns is around competing priorities. And I think in the world of emergency management, of course, emergencies take the priority. And so all of this great work, we're kind of in a time bomb, in the sense that this needs to be a priority so that to ease our work, because otherwise we're really going to be stuck in response all the time, and it's going to be very difficult to kind of get out of that cycle. But it's this sense of competing priorities, and how do we make sure that environmental sustainability is a top priority so that we can get out of this cycle. And I don't know the answer to that, but I do see, when it comes to big decisions being made, oftentimes climate and environment is still not at the forefront. And I don't want to say we're running out of time, and I don't want to be that negative person, but I do think that urgent action needs to be taken. So how can this be framed, and how can it be communicated to, whether it be leadership or otherwise, so that it's prioritized in the way that it should be?
Thank you, Sarah. I mean, we kept the very difficult question for Richard for the very end. But thanks, Sarah, for this one. And Richard, we're looking forward to your answer on this one.
Well, yeah, this is my daily challenge, Sarah, is that, yeah, we have many priorities, especially as IFRC Secretariat on behalf of the whole membership. Some might say too many priorities. And this theme of being greener, environmental sustainability, green response, it's still pretty new for us. And I find myself sometimes at the back of the queue, back of a line of people who are all promoting the different agendas, which are all very important, but they're taking up the time of people within our disaster management system, and the environmental part is right at the end. To be more positive, all I can say is that there's been quite a lot of movement recently. I mean, for example, I didn't exist a year and a half ago. There was no one in IFRC to actually talk to you about this. And we've done quite a bit of thinking, developing what we think is involved in green response, and trying to pull together all the different pieces, because it's very cross-cutting, it's very transversal, it involves everybody and everything that we do. I also think that the new charter, the Climate and Environment Charter, is really helping. It's helping to focus attention a bit more. It was a topic at the recent statutory meetings. And after that, a lot more national societies have signed the charter. And I know in IFRC Secretariat, our focus in recent years was really on climate action and climate change adaptation. And we're now catching up and saying, well, that's great, but the other side of the coin is the environmental sustainability. And let's talk about that as well. So it's a big challenge, trying to get attention, trying to get bandwidth within our system. But I think there's also some kind of green shoots. There's some positive signs that we're moving in that direction. And I really see that the sector, the other actors, our partners, and in particular the donors and governments, the back donors, they're really quickly moving in that direction as well. So even if we're a bit slow internally, we're going to be forced more and more into thinking about this more explicitly, and hopefully making some progress.
Thanks, Richard. I think it was a really good point. And as you say, the fact that probably in a month or years from now, it won't even be a question or a choice. It will be mandatory. But before being forced to go that way, I think it's it's just a question of common sense also. And but yeah, I mean, I'm sure I can see now that in terms of priority, it's going towards the top. I'm really confident about it. Arnaud, back to you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Pascal. It was a great session. Thank you for being flexible and adapting to this change. But I think it was really, really useful. And this gives us probably the willingness to do more, maybe to spend more time on very specific subjects. That was a first introduction, a first webinar. I want to quickly answer to Gemma, who is asking, who's been asking twice, what is the impact of Maine in climate change? So that's a broad question that we can't really address in a few seconds like that. But human being, by emitting greenhouse gases, les gaz à effet de serre, is fueling the climate change crisis. We're changing the way the global climate is working, but we can really dig that further. We can talk about it much in different sessions, maybe targeted towards MENA, as I was saying. We hope to do that. I would like to remind you, if possible, to click on the Google form that I will share again to provide your feedback. These are very important for us to shape the future exchanges that we're going to have, and to tell us what you liked, and to tell us if you want to hear more about certain subjects. I would like to have Catalina. Are you here, Catalina?
Yes, Arnaud.
With me. And yeah, I think we can thank everybody and close. Are we good for that?
Perfect. Yeah, please don't forget to click on the link. That's important for us to keep working on this and have more and more interesting sessions as this one, where we learn a lot about green response.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Pascal. Thank you, Kanika. Thank you, Rumi. Thank you, Catalina. And thank you all very much for attending. Thank you for those who did the marathon of the 3 webinars. and yes, we hope we have more sessions like that. It was great to hear your interest, to all of you. So bye-bye. Have a good end of the day, or day, for those who are joining in early morning, and hope to see you very soon in different opportunities. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Catalina.
Nice to see you, Pascal.
Bye-bye, everyone. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Wonderful sessions.
Thank you, Mukesh. Oh, good. Okay.